If you knew that this was your last day on earth and then you're gone, how would you choose to spend your final evening? Jesus chose to spend his last evening at a dinner with his closest friends. I think you know the story. The long version is found in the Gospel of John, chapters 13, 14, 15, 16, and 17. That's longer than I can deal with in a 10-minute Bible study. We need the short version. Matthew, Mark, and Luke provide that for us. It was Thursday evening of the final week. It was the occasion of the annual Passover meal. Passover was a tradition went all the way back to Moses and the Exodus from Egypt. It became a family thing. You went to your separate homes on this evening, and families gathered together for a meal as they celebrated the story of God's redemption of his people. Jesus will celebrate Passover with his family. Now, not his biological family. They're up north in Galilee. It'll be with his apostles. They had become his family. After years together in ministry, they had become close. Jesus spoke to them on this evening. He said, "I have earnestly desired to eat this Passover with you." Now, words like that would probably be felt by a lot of people because Jews looked forward to the Passover celebration, a time for family to get together, much like we do with our holidays, Easter, Christmas, and Thanksgiving, and the gathering of family around a table for a time of fellowship. But Jesus had something more in mind. For him, this was a special evening. We might even say a bittersweet evening. As Jesus said, "I shall never again eat this meal until it's fulfilled in the kingdom of God." In other words, this would be his final time to sit down at a table with his apostles. As we call it, it was the Last Supper. Now, the location is simply described as a large upper room somewhere in Jerusalem. And when you're thinking of an upper room, it's sort of like our two-story homes, except a little bit different. It actually would be the roof of their home. They built homes with flat roofs, made it strong enough that people could gather up on the roof and do all sorts of things, such as to eat meals or to sit and fellowship and relax and things of that sort. Sometimes they might put a canopy up to protect them from the elements. They might even put up some side walls to give a little bit more protection and privacy. Jesus went to an upper room that would be sufficient for him and 12 men as they gathered together. Now, whose upper room was it? Well, it was a friend, and Jesus had arranged in advance to meet at the home of his friend. What was his name? Actually, we don't know. And even the apostles didn't know because Jesus didn't tell them. He selected two of his disciples, Peter and John. He told them, "You go into Jerusalem and you prepare the Passover for us so that we may eat it." Now, he didn't give them a name. He gave them a sign. He said, "Go into the city, and a man will meet you carrying a pitcher of water. You follow him." I've heard some people tell the story that only women carried water pitchers, and thus you'll be able to spot the one man you're looking for because he'll be the only guy carrying a water pitcher. Probably not true. Fact is, any servant who was told to carry a water pitcher carried a water pitcher. Male or female, didn't matter. In fact, kids, teens, even adults might grab a pitcher and go get some water from the well if that's what the family needed. What you'll have here is, in the midst of all the others moving about doing their business and doing their jobs, you'll have one man who's been watching for them, and when he sees Peter and John and recognizes them, he'll probably just walk nearby, passing them, whispering, "Follow me," and then he'll keep walking. Jesus told them, "You follow him, and wherever he enters, you speak to the owner." See, they won't know which house, which address, until they see him go in a house. My guess, they probably slip right on past it, in case they're being followed by some of the enemies of Jesus, circle around, and then when they think the coast is clear, slip into the house. He says when you get in there, you speak to the owner and you tell him the teacher, Rabbi Jesus. He says, "Where is my guest room where I can eat my Passover with my disciples?" And then he'll show you a large open room. It is furnished, it's ready. You prepare that for us. You know, I read this, it's almost like watching a spy movie, and there's something to that, because Jesus is being very secretive with the location of the Passover meal. Why? He doesn't trust Judas. Can't let Judas know the location because he's been paid 30 pieces of silver to give the Jewish leaders a place where Jesus will be without the crowds, a place where they can arrest him without interference. Passover meal would be perfect as everybody's in their homes with their families. You can't let Judas know, but you also can't tell Peter. As you know, Peter tends to speak before he thinks. He's got a big mouth. And before you know it, Peter might let it slip, and Judas find out. So Jesus sends them with a secret sign, and it worked. It took them to the house that was ready for them. We're told in Matthew that when they got there for the Passover meal, Jesus was reclining at the table with his 12 disciples. I mentioned that little historical note because I want you to understand that if you're picturing a Western-style table and chair setup like we see in all the famous paintings, not historically accurate. Their style of banqueting would be the smaller table closer to the floor. You sat, maybe squatting, or you lean in on a cushion and you eat. It's a different way of approaching banquet. Sounds like fun, but that's what you want to picture in your mind as you imagine this Last Supper. We're told that Jesus poured water into a basin. He began to wash the disciples' feet. Now you think about that. That's odd for Jesus to do the washing. They should be washing his feet. And as he did all 12 of them, at some point he's going to be washing the feet of Judas. That had to be awkward for somebody, don't you think? When Jesus finished, he made note of this. This is unusual, isn't it, fellas? He said, usually you don't get a master washing the servants' his feet. It's the servants who wash his feet. But he said, I want to teach you a lesson. I gave you an example so that you could do what I did. You saw me, your Lord and teacher. I washed your feet. I want you now to wash one another's feet. And Jesus taught a lesson by example, a lesson on service, on ministry. That's what our calling is. If we're followers of Christ, we're to reach out and serve and minister to others. And that's not just those of us who are on the disciple level. That's even the leaders, the masters. All of us, leadership on down. Our task is to serve and minister to others. Now I want you to keep this in mind. Foot washing, some churches have made it into a church ritual. That's fine if you want to do it. That's not what Jesus had in mind. What Jesus had in mind was something that was an act of kindness. It's what Paul includes in 1 Timothy 5:10 when he's giving a list of the good deeds that a widow has done. Hospitality, washing the feet of the saints, assisting those in distress, doing all sorts of good work. It's an example of a service to others. And today we've got a lot more services that we need to be doing for others. Now on this occasion of the Last Supper, Jesus announced there was a traitor in their midst. He said to them, truly I say to you that one of you will betray me. He went on to say, it's someone who has dipped his hand with me in the bowl. He's the one who betrayed me. Now, I've heard some people describe it this way, as if he says those words, watch for the guy dipping his hand in the bowl, and there's old Judas. Next thing you know, he's been busted. No. Or everybody's now watching to see, is there anybody who actually reaches at the same time Jesus reaches? No. Now, he's not going to identify the traitor. What he's basically saying is somebody sitting here eating with me, because he's referring back to a prophecy, Psalm 41 verse 9, where Jesus said, even my close friend in whom I trusted, who ate bread with me, he lifted up his heel against me. Well, everybody is shocked, they're grieved, and they begin to ask him one by one, you don't mean me, right? Not me, right? He doesn't respond to anybody. Now, if all 11 ask that question, you know poor old Judas, he's going to have to ask the question as well. So he does. He leans in and he says, now you don't mean me, right? Surely not I. And Jesus, I think in a quiet voice, would tell him, yes, it was you. Now I say quiet because if he said it out loud, I suspect Peter and the others would try to stop him from doing the betrayal. But they don't know that he's going to do the betrayal. I think in a much louder voice, Jesus is able to say, now Judas, you've got something you need to do, go do it. Now, he can say that because not a one there will even know what it is Judas has got to do. They don't know why he's left the room. They just know he's gone. They speculate maybe he's gone to the temple to give an offering, maybe this, maybe that. Nobody knows. And Judas was gone. And I believe gone before Jesus instituted the Lord's Supper, where his presence would be inappropriate. Now, the rest of the evening, long conversation. John describes the conversation in chapters 13 through 16. Jesus doing most of the talking. And then there was a closing prayer, a whole chapter. In John chapter 17, they sang a hymn, and the evening was done. So much more we could say about that evening, but I'm going to end with what I consider one of the highlights of the Last Supper. It's John 15, verse 15. Jesus looked at the 11 that remained in the room and said, no longer do I call you my servants. From now on, I call you my friends. Well, you got to like that. For years, he's been the teacher, they've been the disciples, the followers. He's been the master, they've been the servants, but he says, those remain true. Those relationships don't change with Jesus. But there's a new relationship now. You're my friends. And over time, they have grown close, like friends. It's not just those 11, though. It's true for any one of us. As Jesus says in verse 14, you are my friends if you do what I command you. And thus, if any one of us are followers of Christ and obeying his will, he regards us as his friends. And what a privilege that is, to be regarded as a friend of Jesus. And thus, perhaps our closing thought should be what the old hymn says. What a friend we have in Jesus.